people have to come to this revelation that, hey, if I'm not looking out for my own healthcare, who is going to look after it? Healthcare is obviously a business here in the United States. Let's be honest, healthy people don't make a lot of money for healthcare. We have terrible food. Most places, not great air. We have not great water. We have not great anything. So even those who are trying, our base levels are so low. I think we need a pretty radical change in our base level, how we think about health, because right now, health in the United States and Canada and most Western societies is pharmacare and not healthcare. And we need healthcare.
Hi guys, I'm your host Paul Fulford and welcome back to the podcast. I'm extremely excited about our guest today, Dr. Craig Davies. He's a friend of mine. He's a leading expert in human performance, conditioning, and therapy, and he's going to be able to share a wide range of his understanding as it relates to these topics. Dr. Davies has worked with elite athletes across all sports with a specific focus on golf for over the last 20 years plus. And he's helped them win tour championships, Ryder Cups, President's Cups. Additionally, working with other athletes, helping them win major championships in their arena, as well as gold medals. He's the founder of Golf Performance Therapy and has facilities both located in Central Florida, Amplivive, as well as the Vault Performance, where he helps athletes and incorporates physics and biomechanics, amongst other things, to really optimize performance. And he's somebody that is always on the bleeding edge of looking at cutting edge therapies and techniques. Today, we're going to dive into how precision health or personalized health can really help drive optimal performance, whether you're a hardcore professional athlete or just somebody looking to be your best. So without further ado, let's introduce Dr. Craig Davies. So Craig, with so much emphasis now on personalized healthcare, especially post-pandemic,
Right.
How have you seen things, or how do you see things changing, precision health oriented wise?
Yeah, I think if you're looking at post-pandemic specifically, that was a big eye-opener, obviously, for a lot of people, right? I think there became a grave mistrust in people accepting what was told to them as being acceptable, the norms, even the basics like the food pyramid, things like that, as being not necessarily great for everyone. If you look at something as basic as food allergies, right? If we gave the same food, could be an extremely healthy food, but we gave it to everyone, there'd be a certain percentage, let's just say 60-70% of the population would do extremely well with that. A small percentage of the population would have very average to no results, and then there'd be a small percentage that would die, right? So for example, if you gave everyone shrimp would be good for a lot of people. For me, I would die from that.
Right.
So that would be no good. And whether you look at things like the vaccine rollout as an example, where we gave the same product to everyone, right? Same thing. It doesn't matter how good the product, it could be strawberries, could be whatever. There's going to be a certain set of the population who's not going to do well with that. And that just wasn't considered. And I think when the average person in the population started thinking about their own health, becoming more resilient to whatever comes next, whether it's some sort of disease outbreak or just how do I prepare myself to be better long term? I think a lot of people left these last 4 or 5 years, like these were like dark times for a lot of people because they had to come to a personal revelation about, hey, the people who I thought were looking out for my own healthcare might not be looking out for it. And if they are looking out for it, they might not be necessarily looking out for me specifically, right? And that includes your own personal healthcare provider, your own physician. Your own physician is so overworked for the most part, they don't have time to be with you. It's not like back in the day. If we think about healthcare, where it came from, and we go back hundreds, if not thousands of years, the person who was in charge of the health of the community, right? That person knew everyone that was in the community. They spent time with them. They spent time in that environment. And when you went in to see that person, it was quiet. Right now it's loud. There's a lot of noise in our surroundings. So it's hard to hear certain things. Back in the day, they could have heard your heart rate. They could have heard your breathing. They knew what things were growing in your environment at that time. And so they could make very specific inferences into your health right when you walked into the room, right? Now we don't have that. Your doctor doesn't know if you were in Jamaica last week, if you were in China last week, what your normal diet is, because we can get food flown from all over the world. Obviously, we have, even in our own local communities, the food sourcing is not great. And so people have to come to this revelation that, hey, if I'm not looking out for my own healthcare, who is going to look after it? Healthcare is obviously a business here in the United States. And let's be honest, healthy people don't make a lot of money for healthcare, right? Let's play it on the table. So I think when people looked at the information that came out from the pandemic, right? One of the most obvious things that happened was they said that people with the lowest vitamin D levels had the worst outcomes, right? Who had the worst vitamin D levels when they measured it? It was people with darker complexion who were living in northern environments. We were coming out of the winter. So if you look at New York as an example, they got people with darker complexions got absolutely decimated there, right? Why did that happen? Well, in New York, it's hard to see sun. Okay. Without sun, your body can't make vitamin D. Okay. If you're living way north of the equator and you have darker complexion, it's going to be way harder to make vitamin D out of the sun that you do get. So those kind of people, we're going to have a very obvious negative situation when it came to having their immune response being what it needed to be to fight against a new variable. And if you look at vitamin D, right? Vitamin D supplementation as an example, it was good when they looked at the studies, but it wasn't the same as when people had high vitamin D levels on their own. And the reason for that is vitamin D is a really large molecule, hormone, that is easy to measure. So we can take a blood sample and we can say, hey, this is your vitamin D levels. We know the sun helps create vitamin D in your body, right? But the sun and what it does to your immune response is not just vitamin D. Vitamin D is one part of your immune response, okay? It's like taking, instead of eating an orange, you take a vitamin C supplement. Obviously, taking a vitamin C supplement is not the same as having an orange. There's so many nutrients, like an apple has 1,200 known nutrients that are packaged inside of it. They're packaged together because they work together. So the sun, when it interacts with your body, does so many things to help your immune response that when you just take vitamin D on its own, it's not the same thing, okay? And so that is one of the things that when I talk to patients, when I talk to my athletes, and they start asking questions, hey doc, what can I do right now to make sure I personally am better resilient to whatever comes next? How am I going to live the next 50 years of my life so that at 75 and 80 and I'm playing with my grandkids, I can play with them the best that I can? How can I respond to the wear and tear of my sport and be able to perform the best that I can be day in and day out? There is no all-encompassing package. It has to be specific to that person in the type of sleep they're getting, the type of light they're getting, how much energy they're getting from the ground, how do they methylate food or not methylate certain foods, what kind of stress they're getting from their family. Like all these things play into it. And unless you're looking at your own individual body, your own individual markers, you're playing against the field in a negative way, right? And I think just like you said, like the last few years, the pandemic opened this up to people because all of a sudden it became important to know, like, how am I taking care of myself?
Do you think that also the time of year that it hit, right? People were going to be, especially in northern climates, vitamin D deficient because of the being winter and being less sun exposed. Do you think that had something to bring to it? Yeah,
I think that had a massive implication to it. As I said, if you're looking at the people who are the most affected, it was dark complexions. They actually tried to make it as if at one point the virus was like a racial thing, that it had a greater effect on certain communities. But in reality, it's, you look at the populations and they were just at the greatest disadvantage based on the time of year. So I always think about New York, and I see people from New York who live there their entire lives, right? I have a lot of friends who grew up there. They're in their 60s now or whatever.
And where you grew up is not far, like
Toronto, right?
Yeah.
It's not that different. And Toronto's getting more like New York in this respect. In New York, it is very hard to find any nature, right? The playgrounds are
The city
artificial.
itself.
Yeah, like Manhattan, right? Manhattan.
Yeah.
You have to like go to Central Park
Mm-hmm.
or something like that. There's almost no sun. You're living in the shadows of the incredibly tall buildings at all times.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, the wintertime, it's gray. You know, it's one of, if not the greatest man-made EMF places in the world. You go down to Times Square and my skin crawls from all the man-made EMFs, right? So if you look at the people who grew up there and you look at someone who grew up in the country,
Mm-hmm.
who had like very few chemicals and pesticides in their ground, clean drinking water, outside in the sun all the time, you know, they're very active. Those people, you can look at their face and it looks healthy. They look happy. They have the tone in their voice of like encouragement and joy and whatever. And then you look at some people from New York who've lived there their whole lives, and these are good friends of mine, but they're rougher. Like they just have that rougher attitude. Their skin looks aged way more so than the other people. The lines on their face are not giving you that sense of vitality and health.
Mm-hmm.
Because to be honest, if you're living in those states, you have to work for your body to be healthy. It's not a natural situation, because everything that our bodies grew up with, whether it's evolutionary or however you want to think about it, it grew up using nature as our source of healing and life. Mm-hmm. And you live in a place like that where these people had the worst outcomes from COVID at that time of year. They have nothing in their body that is natural and healthy. They just had the greatest disadvantage possible. And winter, where they get no sunlight, wearing parkas, mm-hmm. You're inside all the time using circulated air, right? Most of the places that had the worst outcomes, they were crammed together, right? Tight living quadrants. And also that is where they had the first towers, right? The most concentrated towers from 5G and everything else. That again is electromagnetic field. We're electromagnetic bodies. We have to adapt to that. And that's another stressor to the immune response.
Yep. So, you know, sort of a parallel too to the second question. You know, there's a show on Netflix that talks about blue zones and like the people that live to the longest and the pockets of the world where they live. A lot of like what you talked about, I think, you know, going back to our roots, you know, plays into effect what works for them. So what do you tell, you know, your athletes, one, and what can you tell like the people that are like not an athlete that are listening in, the average, not the average person, I don't want to assume anyone's average, right? But the, you know, the lay person, as far as like when you mentioned the 1,200 nutrients in an apple, right? Like, is it a combination of eating whole foods and supplementing because we don't get enough from our food? Like, what do you tell your athletes, and what would you tell, you know, the regular person at home?
This is a tough one to start, right? Because it's such a big conversation piece. And there are gazillions of dollars that are spent and made on different parts of improving our health. Mm-hmm. You know, whether it's, you know, everyone's got these fat loss ideas. You've got all these supplements. You know, my store, Amplivive in Orlando, we have all these modalities, mm-hmm. as well as other people have different modalities. But at the end of the day, most of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to, like, for example, we're taking alkaline foods and green leafy vegetables and all these things to help make our body more alkaline. All alkaline is electron donors. They have a high negative charge, right? So we're taking all these things. They're anti-cancer, they're anti-that. Well, the reason we have to always supplement with those things, including our food, is that we are not getting out and doing the basics of what is required for human health. So I wrote a chapter for one of my mentors, Dr. Tennant, who lives in Dallas. Mm-hmm. And the chapter was on athletes and using nature's physics to heal the athlete. But it's really, you know, could be used for anybody and should be used for anyone. And there's certain foundations for me when I'm working with anybody. And I'll give an example of a case that I had. This person came in to see me, truly remarkable person. They were an actor initially. Mm-hmm. They started going blind in their early 20s, which is obviously very traumatic. Mm-hmm. That person went on to have an amazing academic career, going to law school, attended Columbia and Harvard, and then worked in London, England, in Boston, in New York, clerked at the Supreme Court, did really amazing things. just tremendous author, public speaker. Like if you look at the accolades, you're like, wow, this person has it all going on.
Yeah.
But think about Boston, you think about London, you think about New York. Those are all very, as we talked about, no sun environments, very gray.
Hazy winters,
all
long
the time.
winters.
Yeah. You don't want to be outside. You're not spending time in nature. And so this person had been dealing with chronic pain for 20 years. Okay. Like you've had pain, I've had pain. So when you have pain, especially that chronic debilitating pain that grows and grows, that mentally creates a lot of stress, and it becomes depressing for a lot of people as that keeps building. So this person was only going to bed 2 hours a day, 22 hours a day in bed, not able to continue doing the work, even though they were completely competent and able to do it all. They just didn't have the energy to do it. They had gone around the world to have people try to heal them, shoulder injuries, hip injuries, all kinds of things. And so this person was referred to me by 3 different people in the same week. And so, so they're like, oh,
there's a sign there.
Yeah, let's go check this out, right? And when they came in to see me, I did my assessment. I didn't need to finish the assessment. I knew halfway through that I personally could not treat that person at the time. And the reason was every time they went to get treated, they came out of their treatment from whoever they went to feeling worse. And the reason was their body didn't have the energy to heal, right? Our prescription for this person to start was 6 weeks. I said, you have to get up in the morning and you have to spend the first 30 minutes as the sun's rising, even though, the person's blind. I said, you need to be facing and looking into the sun with as little clothes on as possible, sitting on a chair or standing barefoot, right? And they did that. And I wanted them to do it 2 other times during the day. That was literally the first 6 weeks. Okay. And at the same time, they came to our store and they try to do it every day, where they spent 20 minutes in our full spectrum infrared sauna, which is just supplementing the sun again.
Sure.
Right. And using our full body charging plates, which is supplementing grounding.
Yes.
Okay. So that was the only treatments they got. 6 weeks in, their pain had gone from 10 out of 10 to 3 out of 10. When we measured their energy readings, it had improved tremendously. Okay. What's crazy, but I didn't mention. So when this person came in and I asked them where their pain was, it's the only time I've ever seen it where the person drew every one of their main nerves and branches.
Wow.
So every nerve in their body was, that's how we experience pain, how we move, but they were literally having neurogenic pain through everything. Their body had zero energy to heal. So anyway, 6 weeks on, that's all they had done. Their pain had dropped close to a 3 to 4 to 10. They were only in bed 2 hours a day outside of sleeping. So before they were only out of bed 2 hours a day total. Now they're only in bed 2 hours a day outside of the sleeping hours. Back doing family stuff, back to work, doing all these other things. And it's just because they started using nature to heal. So now when I went, I started being able to treat them.
Yeah.
Right. We used a combination of electromagnetic field therapy, hands-on, like soft tissue work, whatever. And their body could actually acclimate to that. And instead of getting worse with treatment, they improved dramatically. Now, I don't work with this person personally anymore because they don't really need me day to day or anything. Sure. But, I see him regularly doing yoga, doing all kinds of really cool activities. Still has up and down days, but is completely functional. And most of the reason they got better was not through their food and everything else, although that was a part of it. It was they just created a baseline of health in their body from nature's healing, right? So if you don't have that, right, then you can take all these other peptides, you can take all these other things that kind of help, but you're trying to supplement for a lack of baseline health.
So it's Band-Aids versus getting to the root cause.
It's literally trying to, it's like instead of eating, you just take supplements, right? Like the supplements could be good, but they're called a supplement for a reason. It's supposed to supplement, it's an addition to your day-to-day eating.
Right.
And even if you change your diet to keto, to this, to that, and you have no base of energy in your system, right? If you think about oxidative redox reactions, how do you get rid of free radicals in your body? How do you stop cellular damage? It's by donating electrons. Well, if you don't spend any time grounding and barefoot, you have no electrons. You can take all the energy you want from the food to create electrons. It's not the same as every other species on the planet is in contact with nature at all times. That's why we feel good petting our animals.
Right.
Because we're stealing their energy.
And there's the endorphins that creates for both parties, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So like if you're not having that connection, honestly, it really doesn't matter all the other stuff that you're doing. It's going to work for a short period of time. It's going to work to a certain level. It's why when you see the research, they're like, hey, it worked on 30% of the population, but not on the other 70%. But who's to say that the original 30% were the people who already had that baseline?
Yeah.
Then they did whatever it is that intervention was and their body thrived. Whereas the other 70% had, like, if you look at the person I was talking about, you could have done almost any therapy. They're not going to be a responder.
They had, right? Right. Personal experience with that, right?
Yeah.
You being a friend, you've measured my energy at times when I've been depleted, and I can tell you, my personal experience with it was definitely using the charging plates helps, right?
Yeah.
Because like it's like it's grounding on steroids almost, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's basically just getting that proper energy flow back in your body so that you can because that's the thing that I think probably you're talking to even more so with most of Americans. And even like if we were to go back to the beginning with the pandemic piece, is that everybody, or not everybody, but there's a lot of people that are in a constant state of inflammation. So they can't be in a state of recovery.
Yeah. But so that's perfect, right? So again, we were talking about like supplements. We were referring to food, but supplements is also for people is, if you look at pharmaceuticals, you're taking anti-inflammatories, right? Your body's way of getting rid of inflammation is, again, electrons, okay? So if you don't have a base of electrons in your body, you cannot get rid of that stuff. You're going to have a constant state of inflammation. You're going to have higher inflammatory reactions to everything. And so like, okay, if I look at mine, how did I get into this in the first place, right? So probably close to about 14, 15 years ago, I was having these issues. So I missed the first set of symptoms, right? Like yourself, travel a tremendous amount, way too much. And then also trying to train. At the time, I didn't have a goal for my training, so I was just trying to aesthetically look good, right? So I'm not doing anything necessarily that's great for me long-term, but looking good. And so I was getting by because physically people would look, low body fat, had enough muscle mass, still moved quite nicely. But I was tired all the time. My mental acuity was very low, but I just kept drinking more caffeine and getting by, right?
Yeah.
But I was like, oh, it's just because I'm not sleeping. So most people miss the mental parts because it's very easy to just take more stimulants. Then what happened is I started having, besides being really tired all the time, I started having heart symptoms. So
like palpitations?
So what would happen is I would do like exercises that really shouldn't be that difficult. And I would have problems. So what happened was I was feeling this for a while. And funny enough, another guy who's working with me on the PGA Tour had the same thing, but finally his body crashed out. We were in Napa and like he hadn't looked good for a while, but it's easier to see someone else not looking good than yourself, right?
That's for so many things, right?
Yeah. And so we were out for a while looking at this guy and same thing, his body wasn't healing, right? Having more aches and pains and different things. And all of a sudden we're in Napa and he couldn't leave. He couldn't get on the plane. His body, he barely could get off the floor. He was completely crashed out. It took him, I want to say like a week before his body was built up just enough to get on a plane to get home, okay? And, I saw him and I was like, a lot of this stuff's kind of similar, but I'm just gonna, it's him. It's not me.
Yeah, right.
So then it got to Christmas time. So this is probably like 3 months later. And I was at the gym. This is up in Canada. I was visiting my wife's family. And I went to do my movement warm up, right? So it's kind of like a hybrid of animal flow, yoga, just different moves that I put together. This is a warm up. I couldn't get through it. Okay. And when I finished it, I was like, my heart just ripping.
Yeah.
Right. I would guess at that time it was about 190 to 200 when really it should have been 130, 140.
Right.
And it wasn't coming down and I was starting to get really lightheaded. So I sat for a bit and it eventually came down and I was like, okay, let's do the next thing. And right as I started that set, boom, right away it kicked up. And I was like, well, this is not normal. And I started feeling like I was going to black out.
Yeah.
So instead of asking for help, which would probably be the logical thing to do, I went and said, okay, I'm going to sit on the bike. This is how stupid I was. I'm going to go sit on the bike because if I pass out, at least I will just like slump forward, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So anyway, I'm starting to pedal the bike and I can't. I'm like, this is messed up. So again, instead of asking for help, I was like, you know what? I'm going to go in my car. And when I'm ready, I'm going to drive home. Like, I can't sit on a bike. I shouldn't be driving a car, right? So I get into my car and I just lie down in the parking lot. I lie down, like not in the parking lot. I was in the parking lot in my car, just lying down. And my heart rate is flying. So I'm like, okay, you know what? When I get to my in-laws' house, I'm going to tell them and I'm going to like get some help because something's not right. I get to the house, they're having a party. There's like 20 people there. Gosh. So I don't want to make a scene. So I just kind of slide in and go right to my room and I lie down. And after a little while, my heart rate comes down and I kind of feel okay. So I get through that. The next day we're driving. It's like a 3-hour drive from where we were back to where I grew up in Niagara Falls. And I told my wife she had to pull over and we had to get a heart rate monitor because I just wanted to see.
Yeah.
And any small like output or stressor, like didn't have to be physical. It could be a mental stressor. Bang, my heart went up. And so this ended up climaxing on New Year's Eve. Like 9 p.m. we did the kids' early New Year's. And just the stress of them kind of yelling and just fireworks going off on TV, my heart just went boom.
Through the roof.
So I had my heart rate monitor on. I was at 210 to 212 for no stimulus really. And it's New Year's Eve. We have a bunch of people over. I don't want to make a scene. So I'm like, you know what? Go upstairs, relax. I don't know how long I was up there, but for quite a while. And it wasn't until my youngest daughter, who was probably 2 or 3 at the time, came up and saw me and was like, oh, something's not right. Came and sat next to me, gives me a cuddle. And then finally, like, can you get mom? They ended up having to take me to Merge. And it took, so that was like 9:30 probably. It wasn't until 6 the next morning that my heart rate got under 180. They did all the tests they could do. They did everything. Their end result is, oh, you probably have a virus that's affecting your heart, right? So I was like, oh, well, that's not a great answer.
No, yeah.
So I flew back home to Orlando 2 days later. I went, because I have a lot of contacts obviously there, went through every test with the cardiac guys, and they're like, you know what, we can't find what's going on. So now I'm on a mission to figure out what's happening. I was at a point in my house, it's like, it's only 2 floors, but the second floor is a lot of stairs. If I walked up that flight of stairs, legitimately it would take me 5 minutes to recover from that going up the stairs for a while. And so searching for answers, it wasn't until April, I want to say March or April, I went to a seminar and this guy was talking about, you know, what happens when your body's energy levels get too low. These are the symptoms. And you said most people play off the brain symptoms because, just like I said, stimulants, whatever.
Yeah.
But when you get your heart, you can't just play it off. And so measured my energy readings. And to this day, of hundreds and hundreds of people that I've measured now, mine were the lowest at that point. And so I did a week where I charged probably 2+ hours a day. And at the end of that week, all my symptoms were gone. And I couldn't drink coffee anymore because the taste profile changed because my body didn't need it anymore. It became way more bitter and I legitimately couldn't have it, which is too bad because I really enjoy coffee. So, but at that point in time, I was like, whoa, this is crazy. And that kind of led me into a completely different path and figuring out how to heal myself. That led me obviously down to figuring out why am I not spending more time in nature and all this stuff. And now my life's very different.
Right.
But legitimately, if I could have done any intervention I wanted at that point in time, any dietary change, any exercise change, supplement change, any therapy, it wouldn't have got better. My body didn't have the capacity to heal. And if I didn't give it that base level, I would never have gotten better.
Right.
So that's just an example. Like right now, the population as a whole, because we have terrible food, right? We have most places not great air. We have not great water. We have not great anything. So even those who are trying, our base levels are so low that as a population wide, and who knows, with RFK saying he's going to make all these changes, but I think we need a pretty radical change in our base level, how we think about health. Because right now, health in the United States and Canada and most Western societies is pharmacare and not healthcare. And we need healthcare. Right. We need a population that the pharma part of it is the supplement part.
Right.
It's not what we depend on to exist, right?
Right.
And right now, that's not the case.
Right. I mean, again, I think that's why, not all of our foods, but both of us have different foods that we grow ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we know what was that fed them to before we feed them to ourselves, right?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, that's not sustainable, I would say maybe for most people, or it's not maybe possible. Again, you bring up the New York people, like they got a windowsill outside, right? But they do have good farmers markets, and just understanding where the food is sourced from will be helpful, right?
Yeah. Well, think about this part of it, right? It wasn't uncommon not that long ago to have community gardens, right? And community gardens, besides the fact that you get to grow your own food, and it's very hard for one family to grow enough variety of foods to be able to feed them, right? Because it's easier to grow a certain number, but you only need so much of everything.
Right.
But the community gardens were a place that created community. Everyone went there. You met your neighbors. It provided a situation where, you knew who your neighbors were, so your kids could hang out with the other kids. It was a central meeting area, whereas we don't have that now. Mm-hmm. And, I don't live where my parents where I grew up, right? Most people don't. Most people are moving. So you don't have that multi-generational impact on your kids. And the older I get, the more I recognize the need to have not only like familial generations helping to look after kids and nurture them and provide that influence, but you have to have a strong community around you in order for health to be something that happens.
Right.
Right now, most people don't even know who their neighbors are.
Right.
They don't live near their family, and so they're very isolated. And we can talk about how that's a mental situation because there's the loneliness part. There's not that fulfilling relationship aspect. People are meeting their whoever on the internet.
Yeah, swipe left, swipe right now. I mean, there's no butterflies in the stomach anymore, like how we met our wives, right? You have to take a shot at the dark and say, hey, is she going to say yes or no, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so I think we're, look at just on neighborhoods, right? Where I grew up, all the neighborhoods connected. You drove through and you would see it now. It's like the more money you get, the more isolated you get, right? You get smaller communities that are gated. And then even in your gated community, it's like guarded. And there's obviously in some societies, there's a reason for that. But at the same time, it's very isolating, and that's not healthy either.
Well, having that sense of community, right? You're one of my good friends, right? And like attracts like, I think, I've said that before, and I feel like it's a universal principle, right? I mean, it is for so many things. And I think that, and it's for a positive thing and it can be for a negative thing too, right? Where you've got people that congregate together that are in that rougher situation, right? That, like you mentioned, again, we're bringing back New York to the situation. I love New York as a city, right? But there's that gruffness you said in some cases, and it's not with every New Yorker, but there's a congregation of it, right? And like that, not to sound hokey, energetically is not necessarily the healthiest thing, right? Because
you get your echo chamber. Right. You need new ideas and fresh ideas.
Yeah, you got your blinders on instead of opening them up,
Absolutely.
You brought up a lot of different things like, different therapies that you utilize, like the red light therapy, hyperbaric chambers. How do you see, these innovations, and other innovations that you can mention at your places? How do you see those coming into play more, and what excites you most about those in their applications?
Yeah. Okay. So for us, right. And honestly, if you look at most of the kind of groundbreaking tech that's coming out right now, that is looking at improving health and wellness and like biohacking and all those things.
Right.
Most of it is using modern technology to mimic the effects that nature has in order to create the outcome that we're not getting because we don't have that outdoor experience that we used to have. So like for us at our facility, we use, like we said, the true incandescent full spectrum bulbs, right? Because that's very close to the spectrum of the sun. And it gives you the difference between, here's one of the things that is a struggle, right? Most of our light that we're in now, LED or fluorescent lights, is only giving off a very few wavelengths. And if you think about wavelengths, man created the idea of measurement, right? Nanometers, like a certain amount. When you look at like true full spectrum, so let's just say you've got 10 nanometers and 11 nanometers. So most people would say, oh, that's just one wavelength. But there's like 10.1, 10.11, 10.2. There's an infinite number in
256 shades of gray, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And so if you think about the effects of light on our body, the electromagnetic spectrum, it is so hard to measure the effect of that because we don't have the technology that's sensitive enough to measure it. So for example, in our mitochondria, which is like, for a general term, is like the engine of our cell, which is powering. So cellular metabolism is what full metabolism is. You add all the metabolism of the cells together, and that's your metabolic rate in essence. And so there's cytochrome C, which is part of this pathway of how our body creates and uses energy. It is affected by the sun in approximately like the 700 nanometer wavelength range. And when that light hits that part of the mitochondria, it acts like a turbo in your car. So when you hit it, all of a sudden it starts shooting electrons through the electron transport chain at a way higher rate, which creates more ATP and allows more protein folding and energy to be released through the body. Like there's antennas that we have throughout our body that interact with all parts of both the visible and non-visible spectrum, right? That we can't measure. We just don't have the ability to measure it. So when we only have a couple wavelengths that we're interacting with all the time, we're missing so much. It's like taking that, that one supplement as opposed to eating the apple or the orange.
Right.
It might be okay in small dosages, right, as a supplement, but when we have that experience all day, that can't be good for our body. So, for us, we use the full true spectrum. We don't use LED in each color. We're using like full spectrum. We're using charging. So
can you don't lose your thought. I'm sorry for interrupting, but can you explain to people that don't understand the different, like what full spectrum actually means?
So you'll see things being advertised as full spectrum, but what they're doing is they're using one wavelength in each of the color spectrum. They like one bulb for yellow, bulbs for blue, bulbs for red, green, orange. But it's like that certain nanometer wavelength, not all the other ones that are around that.
Yeah.
And also they're not usually at enough power to actually create a biophysiological change.
Right.
So, or you can have like an incandescent power. And incandescent, because the way that light is created, again, is very similar to the sun. You're getting that full spectrum. You're getting all the wavelengths that are built into that. So you're hitting all the different antennas.
Okay.
The light therapy is a super exciting part. Now, there's certain situations where you might only want to use certain wavelengths because you're very much trying to do a very specific pathway.
Right. Like with laser science, when you're looking at medical aesthetics, for example, right? It's selective photothermolysis, right? It's selectively finding that target, your chromophore, like if you're looking at, either oxyhemoglobin, blood, melanin, or water, to specifically change it, right? So having a selected wavelength for something like that, it has a purpose and an intention, and there's a desired outcome that you're trying to get, right?
Absolutely.
So, but when as it relates to what you're talking about for health, that broader spectrum,
creating that baseline.
Yes.
So like if you think about what you're saying, so if you have your general, I'm not a military guy, so this might not be the exact analogy, but you send in your squadron, right? If they're all snipers, you're going to be successful in very specific situations, but you're not going to be successful if you're going against a bunch of tanks. Right. Whereas certain times you need that sniper, which is that very specific light that you're using for those aesthetics.
It's a grenade versus a sniper rifle.
Different. You need different people in different situations. You need different light in different situations. But to create the baseline, you need that full spectrum.
So you have different therapies too, right? Like cryo,
cryotherapy, hyperbaric chambers, increase. A liquid under pressure holds more gas. You get more oxygen delivery to all your cells. But what's interesting is, and this is where I think moving forward, it's going to be fascinating. So our science as a whole is super flawed because it's based on the scientific method, right? The scientific method is null hypothesis, right? So you have this variable and no other variable. And if using this variable, here's the results that we get. And then we take that as like, hey, this is like ultimate science. So for example, in my field, like my initial field of chiropractic, you'd have 100 people come with back pain, and they would do, say, 4 interventions. They would do no therapy, adjusting, exercise therapy, and some sort of modality, right? And then they look at it and they're like, oh, pretty much in each of these different interventions, 12 people got better, 13 people didn't. So they're all the same, doesn't matter what you do. Well, every back pain patient's different, right? As every patient's different. And maybe only 20 of them would have been good to use, out of the 100 to do adjusting on. Maybe 20 of them would have been from soft tissue or exercise. But honestly, probably almost all of them would have been way better if you combined all those therapies, because one intervention is likely not what they need, right?
And how did that problem occur? What was the root cause, right?
Absolutely. Is the reason the back pain's hurting because they have no hip internal rotation? Was it an impact? Was it a trauma? Do they sit all the time? Like all those, even though it's back pain in the same area, it's a facet joint that's irritated. Is it a ligament sprain? Is it a disc issue? Is it XYZ, right? But everything that we do using science right now, for the most part, is using null hypothesis. So if you look at the modalities that we use, for example, hyperbaric therapy, they have all these studies showing autistic kids do very well with hyperbaric therapy. They show obviously people who come up with the bends do great with hyperbaric therapy.
Right, for sure.
Alzheimer's patients, all these things. What they don't tell you is that if you have low electrons available and you go into hyperbaric therapy chronically, you're going to have too much oxygen and creates these superoxide free radicals, which is actually not good for your body.
Right.
So, but you can't do a study where you're like, I'm going to do charging and I'm going to do hyperbaric therapy and I'm going to expose my body to red light that's going to allow my my electron transport chain to get turbocharged.
Right.
They don't do those studies.
So with those three modalities specifically you mentioned, do you recommend a certain order to do them in? Like before you put somebody, like you're going to probably incorporate all three, right? Because I know that you have all three of those modalities, right? So is there a particular order that matters or that you have a preference to? Yeah,
so there's a few different ways that we do it. So when you go into a true full spectrum sauna, as an example, whether you're using it for the heat or not, because that's the thing that people have to understand. If you go into that kind of sauna, there's the benefits of the heat, right? And there's the benefits of the light, and they're symbiotic, but they're not necessarily like have to be done the same, right? So when you go into infrared light, so Dr. Pollack of the University of Washington may be the top researcher on biological water. And when I had him on the Achieve Death podcast a couple of years ago, it was fascinating, some of the stuff that he was talking about. So the more incandescent light, the more infrared light that you have, the more structured your water in your body becomes. So for those at home who don't understand what that means, I always think about Jell-O, right? So Jell-O in essence is collagen protein, hot water mixed together, right?
Right.
And so collagen, your number one protein in your body, has so many charges on it. All the side chains of that protein are fully charged. And what happens when you add infrared energy to that collagen protein, and then the hot is the energy part of it, it creates gel. So living water is gel. I didn't learn that in school. I learned that there was vapor, that there was ice, and there was liquid. I didn't learn about gel, right? So you can cut a cell in half and it takes almost 24 hours for the water to leave the cell because it's in a gel form, right? Like Jell-O. And so the more infrared energy you have in your body, the more gel you get. The more gel you get, the better every cell works. On top of that,
it's like recreating that primordial ooze almost, right?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it is literally, that's why the sun is so important. It does so many things that it's almost impossible to comprehend how important the sun is. But, when you take that infrared energy, your body turns more gel-like. So like even before IVs, generally I tell people to go in for a little bit, not to fully sweat, but just to get more gel, because the more gel you have, the more water your cells can hold. So you can actually hydrate way better. Which is, again, going off topic here, but like people talk about hydration and taking these electrolytes and supplements, but they have no infrared energy in their body. In fact, most people have man-made EMFs, and Dr. Pollack also showed that as soon as you put a phone on a part of a body, it stops your lymphatic flow. Lymphatic flow is super important for getting rid of the toxins out of your cells that are working. So if you don't get rid of your toxins, that's not a good thing, right? That's going to decrease performance, increase likelihood of cancers,
have liver issues.
Yeah, everything.
Kidneys,
Absolutely. So for us, what we'll do is we put people in front of the red light because it structures the water. The more structured the water is, the more charge it can hold. And what it does is allows electrons to flow through your body easier. Okay. Then what we do, either do the charging right afterwards, so we increase the body charge, or we let people charge while they're in the hyperbaric. So now as they're getting under pressure and oxygen delivered throughout their body to all their cells, they're getting that charge put in at the same time so they can actually use that oxygen appropriately because they have the electron balance in there. And that's when you see like the results kind of like peak. When we do each of them separately, you totally get results.
Yeah.
Not the same.
But combination, complementary and combination treatments, I mean, it's going to help catalyze basically what you're looking to achieve, right?
But you can't study that.
No, right. Well, I mean,
you can.
There's still the eye test.
But they're not going to publish that, right? Because who's going to be the person who's going to fund it? Is it going to be the person who's doing the infrared energy? Probably not, because there's just not enough money to be made by those people that they're going to fund it. Is it going to be from the people who do the charging plates or people who are proponents of grounding? Probably not, because they're not making money. The hyperbaric therapy people, maybe, but again, is there enough money in that to fund it? So you don't see these studies being done because they're not the people who have the bank. Right. Free healthcare does not pay the bills.
Right. So with these therapies, amongst others, have you had a situation, or where do you see where this do you have a specific situation maybe that this has specifically boosted or enhanced somebody's athletic performance, for example?
Okay, I'll go to the athletic one in a second. Yeah. So one of the cool cases that we had was this girl, she spilt a kettle on her leg, had 3rd-degree burns over her entire thigh. Okay. And I found this like just such a fascinating case. So I'm not treating her for her burn. I'm treating her for the pain. It just so happens that the programs we ran on her also help heal the burn. Right. So
3rd-degree burns.
3rd-degree, bad. Yeah. Real bad. And so they're running this program at their home to help with the pain. And their wound is healing crazy fast. Like literally within the first 48 hours, the amount of healing that took place was absolutely insane. Full, like all the peeling skin, all that stuff gone, and like a new layer built over it.
So when you say running the program, you mean using a specific...
So yeah, in her case, where she was using a very specific program on frequency-specific microcurrent that is used for wound healing and that kind of stuff, right? And so she ran that, and then so 48 hours in, mind blown. Parents couldn't believe how well it had healed. Yep. But then a week later, get a call from the parents like, hey, it's like stagnant. Like it's healed really well, but now it just stopped healing. And so I was like, oh, okay. So they came in, and one of our docs measured their energy levels, upper limbs, both sides, very, very high. The right side leg, very, very high. Left side, very low. So, because obviously you use a lot of energy to heal. Right. So she just went out, same thing, spent time outside grounding, but also using the charging plates. For 48 hours, did that, and then boom, started healing. She doesn't even have a scar, 0 mark. You cannot even see where the burn took place. In fact, I remember talking to her one day, like, hey, how's the leg doing? She goes, it's going great. She goes, the only problem is I can't tell the story because there's no mark there, so there's no reason to tell the story.
She has to carry like some befores with her, basically, for people to believe her. That's crazy.
So like that's an example of using kind of tech that mimics nature and kind of the response you can get. In terms of like athletic recovery.
Yeah, maybe overcoming like a major setback or something, right?
Yeah, so we have a couple. So one of them, kind of more of an acute situation. One of our guys, it was the first playoff event. I think we're in New York. And all he needed to do was make the cut in order to get to the second event. But he couldn't walk. His right toe was in so much pain, he didn't legitimately was going to withdraw because he couldn't get to the first tee. Yeah. And so my partner, he's an acupuncturist. And so we ran, he did a needle into a couple spots that we talked about down in the foot, applied electroacupuncture to it. And then kind of added on top of that, we used this kind of like biotransducer on that area to add like a little localized energy into it. And was limping as he left the room still. By the time he left the building, he was in full walking, no pain, went and played unbelievable. I think he finished 10th that week. Wow. And he came in, he goes, that was literally some of the best. Like we only had like 7 minutes to get, because he had to go right to the tee.
Yeah.
He's like, I can't believe that I was able to play today, and it's combining super old school, right? Acupuncture technique with a bit more modern, adding the electrical stimulus into it. Because not only does the electrical add an effect locally on the nerve way quicker, so you can get way more of a release in a short period of time, but you're also affecting the lamina up in the spinal cord, up to the brain, changing how the brain's figuring and associating with what's happening down the foot. And that was so fast.
So when you were using the targeted acupuncture, electrical stim, when you're doing that, you have to look, at something that's for low impedance points or resistance points, right? Or when you're doing that, how is that therapy a little bit more targeted or different from traditional acupuncture?
Yeah. The cool thing, so Ty Varley, who's my partner on tour, as I said, he's an exceptional acupuncturist. And so a lot of times the acupuncture points themselves, like the more traditional points, not like dry needling points that people use, a lot of physio and stuff use, they're actually mainly into a space, right? So if you feel like an acupuncture point, it's like a divot, a dimple, and you're putting them into those spaces. And depending on where it is on that meridian line, you can use different devices to check how much energy is flowing through that. You can definitely make a point. So certain points are way better for acute conditions. Some are way better for chronic conditions.
Right.
For this specific case, we did a combination of traditional acupuncture points, but also we went right in at the motor point of the abductor hallucis, which is a small muscle in the foot that affects the big toe. So there's flexor and abductor. We went right into the motor points there, and that's where the electro part worked very, very well, because you're affecting the nerve right away. Yeah. So that was a really cool, acute situation for sure.
So from knowing you and not breaking any HIPAA violations here, right? I know specifically there was an athlete that you worked with, a golfer, Tony Finau, right? Where he was having, again, not saying that there's not a place for traditional healthcare and modalities, but, there was certain things that were therapies that would have obviously been on a checklist were done, and there wasn't the progress made. And it was actually something I know that you were involved with that you also helped bring to the PGA Tour. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, actually, that was a cool case. So for those who watch golf, most people, if they watch golf, they know what happened to Tony, right? So he was at the Masters doing the par 3 contest on the Wednesday, the day before the tournament, and gets a hole-in-one.
Yep.
And obviously excited. Starts running down the fairway backwards, and his talus popped out. Right, so he pretty much dislocated his ankle. Then everyone on TV saw him pop it back in. And my buddy, Dr. Stuart Love, who's Tony's main chiro, we were sitting there watching it, and we could see on the screen what happened. And we're in the therapy area. And we're like, that's not good.
No.
That's really not good.
No.
So
it's not funny, but
fortunately, Tony is one of those guys who, you can see when he walks, he's super relaxed.
Yeah, super chill.
He has unbelievable joint laxity. So even if that happened to my ankle, the amount of tearing of tissue that would have happened would have been months of issues. So with Tony, he came in and his ankle was huge right away. And, the staff or the members, I should say, at Augusta, obviously there's different surgeons, whatever. And so they came in, they were with us right away, which was nice because they could hook up MRIs.
Right.
The MRIs came back. He was unbelievably clean, damage, but very good. And we used, it was crazy because it was literally the very first day that we had branding on the Stamina Pro patches.
Yeah.
Okay. So Stamina Pro is super cool tech. Pretty much looks like a Band-Aid in different shapes and sizes, but inside is Mylar crystal. And Mylar used to be used in phones to hold the charge. Right. And so what Stamina Pro, which their parent company Luminos, what they figured out is how to have put the Mylar strips at the end of a circuit, and they ran an electromagnetic field through different compounds. So for the Stamina Pro, you're looking at pain, inflammation, and tissue recovery is kind of what those patches are meant for. And so they run this electromagnetic field through different compounds that are found in nature that are very good for those situations. So frankincense, turmeric, those type of compounds. And it grabs the electrons from it and deposits it in the Mylar. And then the patches that you use, you put them on your body, and your body induces the flow of the electrons into your body. And from that, it has the effect. So it's cool. It's like, just like the sun, if you have, like you're talking about your devices, which are incredible with the different lasers, if you have the wrong frequency, you get you don't get the result, right? So they have sleep patches. They have these pain inflammation patches. If you put the sleep patches on, they don't do it. It doesn't work because it's the wrong frequencies in the electrons. But when you put the Stamina Pro patches on, and we casted Tony's foot, right? So Doc and I, full pretty much cast of these Stamina Pro patches. And what was crazy is where the patches were, the next day there was almost no bruising, but all around him, it was like the color of that. It was black, purple, whatever. And what was cool is his golf coach, Boyd Summerhays, was exceptional at helping him alter his swing to not have to use that foot as much as he normally would in his golf swing. So he was hitting more like a low stinger.
Yeah.
Out
so
there.
He had to be a little bit more front forward because of that.
Yeah, just no weight transfer.
Yeah.
He pretty much stayed on one foot and hit it. And so the next day he comes in, and it's crazy because we're like, there's no way he's playing. Obviously he's not playing. And he comes in, and it's still painful, but not bad. At the end of that day, he was leading the golf tournament. Okay? Then comes back in. Obviously it's sore.
Yeah.
We recast him. Less bruising the next day, which doesn't make sense. He should still be continuing to get more bruising, right? Because of how much stress there was to the tissue. Anyway, after 4 days, the color was gone pretty much, the amount of bruising. Almost, the swelling was very low. He ended up top 10ning that tournament. And anyone who knows Augusta, it is all hills. It's insane,
just
right?
the walk itself
would be unbelievable.
Yeah.
And so after Augusta, so he got through that, played incredible. And then he was able to take some time off because you just wanted to heal. But because of Stamina Pro, so again, using physics to heal the body, like there's no way he should be able to play that tournament, you know? And so it's crazy. We got the branded patches that morning. Like literally they flew in, and not because we knew that was going to happen.
No.
And I took a photo of it, and I posted when I used to post on social media. And next thing you know, that photo was on ESPN. It was on all these places, went all over the place. And we had, golf is a sport that not a lot of people play very well, but a lot of athletes like to play it.
Right.
And so they're like, especially the Masters, all eyes are on the Masters. And so we had all these different teams from baseball and hockey all of a sudden contacting us saying, hey, what is this stuff? Like, how's this guy playing?
And again, for people at home, right? Like how is this different from like a physio tape that they might be familiar with?
Yeah. So like, without thinking branding, but like a kinesiology-based tape, what they're trying to do for the most part is provide proprioceptive support to those tissues. Because say you hurt a ligament, the ligament normally sends signals to the brain and tells you, hey, this much force is going into this part of the body. This is how much that joint has moved. When the ligament's hurt, you don't have that feedback. So it's easier to get more injured or have lower performance. The tape kind of supplements for that. It activates receptors on your skin and kind of acts similar to the receptors of the ligament. It also can provide minimal, but like joint support. Athletic tape's a bit better for that. But also it lifts the skin. So it helps with lymphatic flow and drainage. So it definitely has a place. I use it actually, if say I'm trying to train like a motor pattern of a shoulder blade. So, a lot of people are like kind of up like this. Yeah. And I want to pull the blade back and down as their golfers coming through.
Well, a lot of people, not like athletes, but regular people, we're all forward because of phones and computers, right?
Yeah, 100%. So I'll use that kind of KT tape to give awareness of the blade positioning. So when it starts to move into that, obviously pulls on the skin, and the person is like, oh,
there's a feedback mechanism.
Correct.
Right.
Whereas the Stamina Pro tape, it doesn't stretch. So you can't really use it for that, but it's actual like therapeutic tape because the electrons that are in it are forcing your body into healing, inflammation, pain. And a lot of people are using it, like a lot of the football guys use it to recover their tissues from whether it's training or the aches and pains from like playing a game or practice or whatever. super cool tech.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you've put it on me before when I've had issues. And it's been really cool to see the evolution of it too. It's a really good product.
You should see the size of the patches they have for the football guys. They're not available to the public.
Yeah,
they are. I feel like it's the size of this table. It's not, but
well, obviously, bigger the athlete, the bigger something needs to be.
Yeah, because those guys were wearing many patches to cover the area, and now they just have these huge things putting them down.
So, speaking about athletes, and what we kind of talked about, what you do is not just about treating physical conditions, right? How do you get to understanding that baseline with blood tests, methyl testing, for people that have maybe heard or not heard about that, VO2 max testing?
Yeah.
Like, what are you, finding that data shows, like imbalances, as it relates to the brain, the overall health, even sexual health for people? Like, what do you find those tools do to help establish a baseline?
So let's put this to the average person, right? Because be more practical.
And just help their overall quality of life, right?
So this again goes back to what we talked about at the beginning of this podcast about personalizing your healthcare and taking ownership of your healthcare. So it doesn't matter if you have a great physician, that person might retire, right? It doesn't matter what your starting numbers are. I think what's really, really important is being able to keep your data. So whatever you're testing, people need to keep a log, like a catalog of that data. And a lot of people just keep it online, they forget about it. I think people should print it out. It's way easier. Print a copy, have it in a folder.
Kind of like an in-body test, right?
Yeah. Because here's what happens. Say, let's do blood, right? You go through your basic blood markers, whether it's thyroid levels, different testosterone or estrogen or whatever levels, vitamin D. So we have these man-made created norms, and we can debate the reliability of the norms that we've created. Okay, the problem is these norms keep getting worse because our population is getting less and less healthy, and so now the norms are getting different. Right, we're changing the numbers. Also, debatably, or maybe not debatably, a lot of these numbers have been altered because it provides a level that more people fit into that then causes them to be on more pharmaceuticals. So when you look at, are you in the norm or are you not in the norm of a certain blood test, I think it's good to know if you're fitting into it.
But you're looking for specific numbers for feedback, right? You're not overly concerned about the norm, because like even BMI as a measurement, for example, right? Like you can have a 35 or 40 BMI person and say that they're obese, but you can also have a bodybuilder who's a 35, 40 BMI that's 7% body fat.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And that's what I'm saying. Like the numbers they give, I think they're a decent reference range to look at. Because obviously if you're way off, like, okay, why am I off? And then figure out, is this relevant to me or not? But what's more important, let's just say for any given test, let's just say the norm is 50 to 100, okay? And you go in, you get your test, and you are at 95, okay? So you're in the norm, you're in the high end of the norm, right, of what they're saying. You go in the next year, you get tested, and you're 54. You're in the norm, so your doc's gonna look at that number and be like, yeah, you're in normal range. That is a scary situation that you just went from 95 to 50, whatever it is. So people need to start looking at their own numbers and not just saying, hey, am I in the normal range, but what's happening in this range? For me, that's more important. So when I'm looking at my athletes, it's not like what is the range they're in necessarily or whatever. I'm like, what is happening year to year? Is it going the way we want or is it not? So a lot of times, for example, they'll look at testosterone or let's say cholesterol levels, which I think is one of the most bastardized measurements that we have because the way people are interpreting the numbers is very neglectful in certain cases. So you'll look and someone and will say, well, you have high cholesterol. Now there's a lot of research showing people with higher cholesterol live longer. Right. But let's pretend that's not the case. And let's pretend
higher cholesterol live longer. There's a lot of studies out there. That's not what you hear normally.
No, that's not what you hear. So let's just say you're high cholesterol, right? So people are like, oh, we got to put you on a cholesterol inhibiting situation. So, okay, but why is my cholesterol high? Well, if I have low testosterone because I've been under a lot of stress, I've been training hard, competing hard. I need to make more testosterone. Well, how do I make testosterone if I no longer have cholesterol, right? That's the backbone of testosterone. So then they give them these supplement or these medications to get rid of their cholesterol levels. And now they can't build testosterone. So then they go on testosterone replacement. It's like this constant evolution of more and more pharma. But the other thing is like, you know, do I have crazy high cortisol levels? Well, now my cholesterol is going to cortisol. Like you have to figure out, why do you have high or low numbers?
And that can be, you know, again, another aspect of what you do is like stressors. And stressors are not just physical stressors on the body, but mental, right?
Yeah.
How does mental resilience and how do you incorporate, you know, mental strategies? Sean Foley was on the podcast, right? And obviously a good friend of yours
Great
too,
friend of
right?
mine, yeah.
You know, longtime friend of yours. You know, a lot of what he does, again, and as we get further into like your real specialty as it relates to the biomechanics, right?
Yeah.
You know, his coaching methodology is similar to that, but a lot of what Sean is doing is a psychologist or psychiatrist as much as he is a coach.
Yeah.
You know, how much does that play into what you do on a regular basis with your athletes from the health perspective?
Yeah. So the therapy and training room, but definitely the therapy area on the tour is the barbershop, right?
Yeah, it is.
It's where people, it's literally the only place. So golf's an individual
sport. There is no privacy, really.
No. But it's, you know, golf is such an individual sport. Like you have your little mini team, like your coach and your mental coach and all that stuff. But, it's an individual sport. And so the therapy area is the one spot where guys come in. There's no media. Netflix isn't coming in to film, that. And they kind of chill. And we get to spend so much time with these guys. I see them, you know, a lot of times Monday to Sunday, usually twice a day, before and after, for 25 to an hour, kind of, right?
Depending on what they need, right?
Yeah. And so it is our time. So like, for example, in the morning, when they come in, like anybody else who's living a normal life, they've got wife stressors, which not necessarily bad things, but, you know, you just having that relationship. You have kids. You might have just read the news and something you don't like. You might have heard from your parents. You might have had a house leak. You have all these different things.
Just the travel in and of itself.
Yeah. You got to figure out where your food's coming from.
Yeah, right.
So they come in, especially if it's like a big, you know, we're in election time. Everyone's thinking about all this stuff. So they come into the therapy room. My job is to allow them an opportunity to get whatever is going on in their life off their chest so that by the time they leave, we've changed their framing of what they're focusing on from whatever it was externally to, okay, we're going to practice. And now when I step on that range or the practice green, that's what I'm focusing on.
So how do you get them to shift that focus?
So it depends. So we'll use potentially what's happening. Like if I know what's going on in the person's life, which I usually have a pretty good idea, it might require a certain electromagnetic field protocol just to downregulate certain parts of the brain, upregulate other parts. It might be, say they're dealing with like an injury that's really kind of like messing with their head a little bit. We might run something to dampen the thalamus response so that they're not as like mentally aware of that pain. But a lot of the times it's using certain triggers, whether it's through breathing, like I said, electromagnetic field protocols, or changing their training program. So like, for example, way back in the day, we're in the Tour Championship going into Sunday, and Kevin Chappell was one of my guys. He came in to the trailer and he was so amped up, but it was like not a good amped up, right? Like he was stressed out about having to go play. I think he was playing with Rory that day. And, you know, he's like, hey, what are we gonna do? So we literally just spent 10 minutes working on different breath techniques that we have and imagery. And by the time that happened, right? And plus there's certain acupuncture points you don't need to use needles that you can stimulate
push on
that actually like are very good at changing breath work. And
because it's also breathing from your stomach and your chest. There's stress breathing, right? Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
And so we went through those protocols so that after that 10-minute period, then we could start going in our warm-up. We changed the warm-up to be way less stimulating, right? Get them into a groove.
Like a methodology type of situation.
Whereas there's other times guys come and they're just flaccid, like flaccid is probably not the right word, but they're like way too mellowed out.
Chill. Yeah. Not focused.
And you got to bring them up, right?
So I almost feel like of all sports, right? Golf can be, it's like a hyper microcosm of mental to manifesting.
Yeah.
Right. You know, because when guys get in their head, it really affects their play. Right.
So I think golf,
like even yips and things like that.
Totally.
Right.
I think golf is probably the most mentally stressful of all the sports. And I know people will argue that, but the reason I'm saying that, if you look at other sports, there are certain situations where they are similar to golf. Okay. So where they're dissimilar, whether it's hockey, basketball, soccer, doesn't matter, football for the most part, you're reacting to your teammates and your opponents, and your body's responding automatically to that. If you're taking a penalty shot in soccer or a free throw in basketball, then that becomes different, right? Now you're stopped, you're paying attention. What am I going to do? What's the movement? You see the guy, they're practicing their movement, right? And that's when you see things happen that would never happen normally. So like I remember Roberto Baggio, one of the best soccer players at the time for Italy, having to take a penalty shot in the World Cup. And that guy could hit one piece of that net in practice probably 8 or 10 times, right? He missed the net by probably 20 yards.
Wow.
Right? Like how does that happen?
Yeah.
That's not going to happen. You know why it happened? Because you had 40 or 80 or whatever thousand people in attendance right at that moment, plus everyone on TV. And it was like, usually it's loud, it's like, right? Everyone's eyes are on you. When you do a free throw, you got people distracting you in the back, but you're like, okay, my teammates
It's like missing a wide open catch for a wide receiver.
Yeah,
right?
like you shouldn't miss that.
Right.
But you have time to think.
Yeah.
So these guys, every single shot, it's not reactive, right? It's like, okay, the ball's here, get my position.
How much time do they have to think about it walking up to the next shot?
It's just, and then you have guys, you know, that's why certain players hate playing with other players because they're so slow. They have too much time to think. Like I have some players that as soon as the guys hit, their ball is honestly in the air 3 seconds later, right? Because they're just that type of player. But then you see other players who sit there for 2 minutes, it seems like, before they hit a shot, and that can throw you off. So if you look, there's certain PGA Tour players, when you look at who they're playing with, their scoring averages change dramatically because of that.
That's interesting.
But yeah, like the mental stresses are huge. So this is where, like for us, we try as much as we can. If I know something that's bothering you in your life, I'll try to do some research and work so that when you come in, I can figure out a way of not necessarily directly, but indirectly rephrasing it to create the outcome that we need you mentally to be when you leave the table.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of times they don't know we're doing it. Right. But the other challenge that we have is, you know, when people first get married, when they're about to have a kid, the biggest one is when they're building homes, because nothing goes right when they're building homes, right? They're getting calls all the time from whether it's their wife, the realtor, or this builder. And when they're practicing, they're no longer focused on their practice, right? And they might go do 5 hours like they always did, but that 5 hours is broken up. And even if it's not getting a phone call, subconsciously they're thinking about stuff. And so over the last few years, one of my biggest things I've been trying to do is creating a routine for people to do when they go to practice away from tournaments that starts to get them to disengage like we do on tour. So by the time they've done this routine, they're into their practice. But still, they get a call. What are you going to do?
So you feel like routine is helpful?
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the same routine all the time. Like I said, if you're too low or too high, you need to change that routine. Yeah. But your routine should be similar and adaptable to allow the day-to-day, like, so dynamic systems theory, what that is it kind of tells you that every variable is important and every variable can have a different level of importance based on the time, the situation, whatever. For example, there was an athlete out of Russia who was an amazing gymnast in the 70s, and they were favored to win the gold. They won everything, right? So what they did is they set up their practice routine where they had crowd noise put in. Everything about the facility was exactly like it would be for the Olympics. And went through the practice, and they had crowds in there. Right?
Yeah.
Person went to the Olympics.
There's a lot of things that teams do that now. They feed in the crowd noise.
Build it all into it, right?
Yeah.
They go to the Olympics, and the person did not perform the way they wanted them to. And they're like, well, what is the difference? Well, the difference was in practice, the athlete got to choose when they were going to go and do the routine, right? And say it's tumbling. They're like, okay, you ready to go? Go. In the Olympics, it's not like that. They call you and you have whatever it is, 40 seconds to go. So the routine that they had wasn't built for that situation. So even though they did everything else, that one variable was so significant that it caused them to not be as successful as they should be. Whereas that may not be something you would consider to be a huge variable in most situations. But for that specific person in that situation, they had adapted their tumbling routine to be too long. Yeah. And then or it could be the beam or whatever it was, right?
And if you don't have enough time to adapt, it can impact, right?
Then you're stressed.
Right. And then, I mean, to bring it back to when we were talking about at the beginning with the pandemic even, live sports was different when it was basically a vacuum, right? And athletes mentioned like the crowd, not realizing how much the crowd impacted their performance. And again, the body is an adaptive machine, the same as the brain. So they adapted eventually, right? But it was something that they had to deal with. Right?
But it could also be, say what's interesting, it'd be positive or negative. Like there's certain players who did way better when we had no crowds. Right. Other players, when there was no crowds, did very little in terms of accolades during that time because they feed off the crowd. Right. And then all of a sudden the crowds came back and it flipped.
So again, it's a matter of like what you're saying when you're bringing people on the table. It's trying to find the closest level of homeostasis that you can, right? That's going, and it's probably also athlete specific for what they need for performance, right? Some people need to be up here to perform. Some people need to be down here, but trying to level it out is the key, right? Yeah. As far as, your expertise, you've worked with athletes from all walks, right? Yeah. With kind of a niche in general with like rotation, right? In the physics of that, where it would be a lot with hockey, golf, tennis, right? All sports have rotation. So what is it that you focus on as it relates to the biomechanics of the body that when you're doing your treatment and assessment?
So with rotational athletes, if we look at our modern society, most people, do what we're doing now. They sit, they stand, they walk, they run, they squat, they do maybe deadlifts, they do walking lunges, whatever, but it's pretty much all sagittal plane-based movements.
Not functional, so to speak.
Yeah, or functional for what they're doing. For that movement. But not for a situation like golf. Like literally the body, almost every joint in the body goes nearly maximal range of motion in the golf swing. Right. So like obviously the less my head moves and the more my body moves, this is like end range rotation of my neck. Right. Yeah. So if you're deficient in certain joint ranges of motion, it's going to put a lot of stress on other areas, including that area, but other areas of the body that are compensating to create more motion. And so for me, like a couple of the big things that we have to do is one, figure out where is that athlete, whether it's a country club or amateur athlete or super high level professional, where are they deficient in their capacity to create rotation, right? And that could be their foot pronation, supination, their hip internal rotation, external rotation, their thoracic spine mobility, extension. It could be, are they able to segment one level of the spine on the other, or do they all move as a block? And like we could, if we had more time, we could go into the minutia of like how the brain perceives joint ranges of motion and stuff. But the issue is most people suck at rotating. Yeah. Right. Like so many people, they go to reach back in their car and they hurt their back. Right. Right. They go to pick up keys with a little rotation. That's when they hurt their back. Yeah. Because they don't do it. And the whole concept of use it or lose it is very, very true. So we have, just very basic, if you think about each joint being like a 3-dimensional ball, and we're only ever using it this way, well, the receptors that take in that positioning aren't activated. And so in the brain, you no longer have information that's coming from those joint receptors. So when your body creates a movement plan, it has no access to that. So it's doing the best that it can. And that's why most people have all this, like, especially like the groin muscles, this resting tone that's very high. Yeah. There's no reason for that. The reason for that is either old injury or the receptors are not giving you good information. You don't know what to do, so you're holding tension. Right. And so we assess the body, figure out what joints don't move great, what their gifts are, like what move very, very well. Right. Like Cameron Champ is one of my guys. I've worked with him since he's like 14 years old. And everyone's like, well, how does he hit it so far? Well, he hits it so far because his body is literally designed to rotate. Right. He is a freak.
His rotation is, his shoulder turn is insane.
It's insane. Yeah. But that's also why historically he had very specific injuries in very certain areas that almost no one else had, because his gifts when overdone, created too much stress in very specific areas.
And you look at a guy like Scotty Scheffler, right?
Yeah.
You know, again, there's the traditional way of how a golf swing should look. And you look at a guy like him who's performing, right? He moves in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
Right.
And so what's cool about him, right? You see it like kind of like Bubba used to, like his leg comes out and whatever.
Right.
So if you don't have certain ranges of motion available to you and you don't allow yourself to be able to move in a different way, then you're going to get hurt. So let's say you don't have good hip internal rotation, that lead hip. As you're coming through, you're going to hit end range. Well, if you don't have that motion, the best thing is clear the leg, because then you can keep rotating towards the target.
Right.
And a great athlete like Scotty Scheffler is able to allow that body to do that. And his coach was fantastic. Randy Smith didn't force him to change when he was younger.
Didn't put him in a box.
No, and let him do it. Now he's the best ball striker potentially in the world, right?
So pure, right?
And if you would have changed him, he might have gotten hurt way earlier. He might have had a back injury, hip injury, knee injury. And that's the thing. Rotational athletes get hurt in every part of their body. Like, everyone always asks me, what's the most common injury you see? Honestly, every injury. Every single injury, because every joint's hitting end range. It's almost like a rotary whiplash all the time. And so the volume that these guys play in is so high, right? They play every single day. And so when you have guys who are coming through and they're jamming their joints in the back, that little inflammation that builds up, that creates neurological atrophy of the stabilizing muscles there. When you have the atrophy, you can't see it in the back because there's so many layers. You know, when you see someone who has an ACL injury or whatever, you see that inside muscle, the knee, the VMO, it disappears very quick.
VMO is gone.
Because that's what the body does. It says, hey, you can't.
It's not available for use anymore.
Shut her down.
Yeah.
But modern life, we keep going.
Yeah.
So that's like, for me, one of the ways that we try to, like, we accept it. Okay, you're going to have stress to those joints, right? You're just doing hundreds of swings a day. You're going to have stress there. So, you've got a great device.
That's what I was going to say. We've incorporated some of these things where, again, one of the coolest things for me is that I've made throughout my career a lot of friends through being in the space that I'm in, right? The medical aesthetics and now sports medicine space, right? Where that are physicians and practitioners. But this was the first time I was able to actually bring in somebody who was a friend first into like working with what I do, right? Yeah. And the AccuFit device was something that where you were just talking about it. That's what it was. I was going to go there because you were talking about how the VMO shuts down, when you have an injury in a certain area, whether it's surgically repaired or not, because of the way that our bodies work, right? And you're going to stop using it. It's not just healing and recovering from the injury itself. It's specifically for muscle, the atrophy that happens that muscle needs to be built back up and again, recognized available for use, right?
Yeah.
So without going into crazy details on the specifics of the device, right? Like how it works, but it is the first of its kind device to really incorporate the biomechanical and physiological principles of how efferent nerves and muscles contract together, right? To create that close to similar real life movement. How did you see, you experiencing the treatment yourself and with some of the athletes we've treated, like what are some of the benefits of like a leap forward in technology like that?
Yeah. So I think there's two distinct major opportunities with a device like yours. So, one of the interesting. So I use a lot of like compacts or whatever previously for muscle stim machines, but it only allowed a certain level of contraction before it got uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And with any muscle stim device, the reason I use it is there's either an inability to work a muscle because of an injury. And so the way, the body works is, yes, you need to have the muscle mass there, but you also need the neurological aspect.
Right.
But if I can't work the top down or the reactive part of the training because there's an injury, it's still way more beneficial if I can maintain the muscle bulk so that when the person's able to, like the joint's fixed, I don't have to worry about rebuilding the muscle. I can just integrate the nervous system. Right. So that's
sending and receiving.
Yeah. And creating that movement plan, right? That we were referring to before. So like, for example, I've used it on people who had like VMO issues. That was awesome because we get a super high threshold contraction with no pain, right?
And no stress on that joint area or whatever area that needs.
Which is shocking at the level of contraction we're able to get with that. But I think, so we also used it for back rehab, activating mid-lower traps, right? If you wanted to create, so you could, three things. You can either do it if you have a joint issue and you can't work the muscle because of the joint issue. This allows you to create that volume and mass and not necessarily not even have the atrophy, but actually make gains in that volume. Two, you can use it for muscle
re-education.
Like retraining motor patterns. What I think, if I'm looking at golf as an example, it would be really cool, which I haven't been able to done yet. But hey, guys, if you want to give me a device to bring on the road, I'd be happy to try this out.
Yes, we can do that. So
we'll go back to the facet joints as an example, or the discs. If you have these, you're going to have this micro trauma injuries, right? It is going to happen. Every golfer is getting it, right? It's unavoidable. And the problem is you can't see, you got the long erectors on top, and then you got your transverse abdominis, and you got your obliques, and then you've got your multifidi and rotatories and all these layers. So when the rotatories and multifidi get atrophied, if you're not staying up on it, it's hard to see. It's also very hard to keep them active if you're constantly having joint inflammation.
Right.
Whereas using this device on a weekly basis, just regardless if there's pain, regardless if you think there's an issue, keeping that muscle volume there is huge, because then as long as you don't have that atrophy, we can constantly be working with it to train the nervous system part of it.
Right.
But if we're hitting, like if someone has a disc injury or an old disc injury or a chronic like beat up facet joint, every day that is going to signal to those muscles to get turned off.
Right.
And so you're fighting that all the time. So if you have a way of stimulating it to minimize or negate the atrophy of that area, you're just winning.
Yeah. Right. And we're able to see people coming back in half the time because of those things, right? And the thing I think is super interesting for golf that I would love for us to explore further, which I know we will, is you mentioned earlier these guys or gals, right? Play all the time, right? They're like, where maybe our dad's vision of a golfer, they're athletes 1,000%. There's no denying it right now. And if you look at, they are hitting balls every day. They are working out every day. If they're playing well, they're traveling a lot and they're playing Thursday through Sunday or Friday through Sunday, right? There's all this regular activity and or trauma or tearing down and breaking of muscles and things that occur. What I would love to do more with, and which I think, is for golf specifically, or rotational sports, right? Is that by incorporating this, if like what I know we've seen on some level, right, which it could impact massively, like you said, having it on tour, is basically if they can it's not a supplement for working out, but if they can work out less and have time more for recovery, that's ultimate benefit.
For sure.
Right?
That's definitely a win. I think there's the potential of a device like that to be incorporated for very different reasons, for different people and at different times, into the training program, the rehab program, the preventative care program it's pretty massive. And like even things which I haven't really played with it for. So like one of my guys who I've worked with, I don't get to see him much because he plays on a team that's not anywhere near Orlando, but he had a lat tear as a pitcher this year. He was playing unbelievable, lat tear, done for the year. It's just a partial tear, but obviously if you're throwing that hard, you can't have a partial tear in play. Is like,
because a partial tear becomes a full tear.
Yeah, is like, what is this device? How is it going to shorten his time off?
Yeah,
right. And not only is it going to shorten his time off, it's like when he goes back to play, how much better is he going to be in return? Not only in his performance, but better physically, so that it's not likely to happen again. Or now that you're not able to use your lat to decelerate your arm, what does that do to your shoulder? What does that do to your elbow? Like all these other things that now might be compensating getting hurt. Your lat might feel good, but it's still weakened. It's whatever. Like how does that help those athletes, right? Like that's the type of thing that a device like that can really make a huge impact on, that I think will be explored a lot more in the next couple of years.
Yeah. And again, it's not just for athletes. Yeah. Obviously this device is for the general public, right?
Well, even aesthetics, right? Yeah, like I can't remember who we were doing it on, but doing like obliques, abdominals, and the change that you can see there so quickly is pretty awesome. And then if you think about it, you can then start, again, we were talking about stacking earlier,
Yeah.
right? So obviously when you have those contractions that are that intense, that uses a lot of metabolic energy, right?
Yeah.
So how do you then supplement it with making sure that you have enough electron flow, adding infrared light onto it, all those things onto the treatment thing? How does that stack up to create these crazy results?
And you brought up earlier something, that we can kind of close on this with. I still have one more question that I want to ask you about amateurs versus professional golfers, right? But like touching on something you said earlier about ATP, right? ATP is for our muscles, for example, right? Is the energy that we would burn to fuel them, right? The biggest byproduct of burning ATP is lactic acid as it relates to the muscles, right? So when you're doing a regular sit-up, for example, right, you're engaging your rectus abdominis, your transverse obliques. You're also engaging your legs, your glutes, your quads, your hamstrings, everything. You're increasing heart rate. You're depleting the body of oxygen. So there's going to be ATP burned, right? And that's why we get sore, right? It's like pouring alcohol on a wound on those micro tears, right? The interesting thing about AccuFit, why I think a game changer as it relates to prevention as well as it is coming back from, is that you're not increasing heart rate. You're not depleting the body of oxygen. You technically don't even have the weighted load of gravity working against you because you're just sitting there and laying there. The energy is being supplied by the device. So there's not this massive amount of ATP usage, right? So it's not going to have the traditional type of workout soreness, right? It's something that you can move. It's more tightness than soreness. And it's something that you can, it doesn't take you out of being able to move, and it helps you recover, right? Now I know that like off-label uses, right? There's times where if there is lactic acid buildup, there's different modes like the tap mode that can help with
flush that out.
Yeah. Right. I think that's another interesting fact of it because, ATP is used for different things, right? But as it relates to the muscles, it's an energy, right?
Yeah. So like ATP. So one of the things we didn't talk about, right, which I think is super important right now is I just thought of this because you were talking about like an athlete who used like a certain modality and had crazy results. Yeah. So like you hear about it a lot right now, but NAD, right, moving forward is, and
you do those drips.
Yeah, we do those. And really, the only way you can actually get a useful source of NAD is via drip, because the NAD molecule is so unstable that if you take it in a capsule form or anything else, honestly, you're pretty much wasting your time.
Most of the capsules that you find effective, are they like NAD precursors, not actual NAD?
Yeah, that'd be the one I would take for sure. That's a much more stable molecule, super effective, especially when you take it with like coenzyme Q10 and everything else that's built into that product.
Right.
But like this guy, he took NAD. And so for those who don't know, and the reason I thought about this is you're talking about ATP, right? So NAD is a molecule that its job literally, when you eat food, is you break it down to electrons. It grabs it's part of the breakdown. It takes the electrons and delivers them to the mitochondria, right?
You were talking about mitochondria earlier.
Yeah. And so as we get older,
the engine
it's
for
the
the
engine
cell.
of the cell.
Right.
And one of the main things with aging, that's why they call it NAD the anti-aging molecule, is it gets significantly depleted as we get older. And so when it gets depleted, you can't deliver electrons to the mitochondria. That means there's no electrons going across the mitochondrial membrane, electron transport chain, and that's why you don't produce as much ATP, right? So if you can't produce ATP, you can't pretty much do anything. And so NAD is such this guy, he's in his late 50s, and it's crazy. So when he first came to me, say 5 years ago, he'd trained with everybody and like they all did great jobs. I have the fortune that I get to do his training. My partner at Tide does his therapy, which is nice to split that up. And then my buddy, Dr. Ara Sapaya, who is incredible, takes care of all his blood work, makes sure everything's going good.
And he's the one who does peptides more and things like that.
He does all that kind of stuff. He's fantastic. I can't speak any more highly of
Ara's great.
Ara Sapaya.
Ara, we treated Ara too.
Yeah.
He had crazy reaction.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so when he went on this NAD, his ability to recover from training sessions unbelievable. His body's adaptation to not being injured. Like he gets treated, again, he does get treated all the time, but he used to have knee pain, this pain, back pain, whatever. And used to have, this guy is so far ahead of the curve. He had his own Tesla machine. He's got all kinds of stuff to heal, like crazy amounts of devices. He doesn't have to use any of them anymore. And sure, I could say it's the training we do, whatever. But honestly, the NAD itself was such a huge change because the amount of cellular energy that this guy's now able to produce because it's actually delivering electrons through a system is just a different level. Honestly, I would struggle to keep up with him. And he's got a decade on me. But he is training at such a high level, way more than he's ever trained ever in his life.
And I can tell you from when I originally met him to seeing him now, you know how you were mentioning and touching on just the vibrance of the skin.
Yeah.
You can see he looks younger now.
He's growing hair in places that he hasn't had in forever, right? To be honest with you, he's the reason that I started taking NAD. So I'm only a few months into it. And what's for my biggest experience, besides having definitely more mental acuity and energy, is like my joint pains are like, I forgot that I had certain issues.
And you do have, you've had those.
I've had significant injuries.
Yes.
So like for me, that is a huge change. And when you have more NAD, then you're allowed to give more electrons across your chain. Now you produce ATP, which now you can then do your device, right? Now you can then, all the stuff that you're doing with the device afterwards, you now have the energy to then use the device at a higher level, use the results from the device at a higher level. So like all these things stack together, right? But none of it is working unless you have your base foundation, right? So you have your base foundation. Everybody can do that.
Yeah.
Just reconnect with nature. I know that sounds cheesy, but it's really how it's supposed to be. And then from there, we can stack all these other things on it and create like literally superhumans, you know?
Craig, appreciate you as always.
My pleasure, dude.
You know, it's clear that we're going to have to do another one of these because there's a lot of topics we could go further into. For people that want to follow you or find you, if they're local or they're coming to town, what's the best way for someone to find you? I know you've also got an app that you work with that's through the Vault and through Amplivive. So how can people connect with you or find you?
Yeah. So locally in Orlando, our like recovery center is Amplivive, which is AMPLIVIVE. It's kind of a tough name. Yeah. So you can find us at amplified.com. We're in Windermere, Florida. Then we have the Vault Performance. That's where we do most of our athlete work, golf work. That's at Orange County National. And then the app is the Vault Performance online. And that's where we do all our training programs, injury recovery programs, all that kind of stuff. And then I just restarted my podcast, which is Achieve Depth Radio, which is on like iTunes and Spotify and all that kind of stuff. So most of the stuff that's on there was old because I stopped for about 1.5 years, and we're just recording now. So
and maybe a quote unquote podcast studio may have turned into a theater room potentially.
Yeah. So my old podcast studio, which is awesome, it's a pretty dope theater room.
It is a pretty dope theater room.
But now I do have to come with a plan B for my podcast. That's actually why the podcast stopped. Is the kids and my wife won, and I lost the podcast studio.
Well, I mean, look, happy wife, happy life.
Yes.
Same thing for me, right? You know. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you again, Craig. You know, Dr. Craig Davies, an unbelievable resource. You can see through his work of working with athletes and, the average person alike that there's a tremendous amount of knowledge and wealth and resource. And I can't thank you enough for coming on here and sharing your experience with us today.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. So make sure if you're not following and you're not already liked or subscribed to the podcast, please like and subscribe to wherever you get your podcast. Thank you very much.